You know, I don't really consider myself as a technical photographer or reviewer. Whenever I test the lens, I may mention things like corner and center sharpness, the distortion and vignetting, or the color fringing and flare. But when I take a photo or when I look at other people's images, I tend to care more about things like, you know, the composition or the story or the overall atmosphere, much more than things like, you know, if I can see the model's eyelashes. The EF mount 1.2 lenses like the 50mm and the 85mm were some of my favorite lenses that I've owned in the recent years, but optics wise they were not the best lenses, and also because they're quite old now, it's very hard to find a good copy. I think I've owned maybe 3 different copies of the EF 50mm 1.2s, and they've all had some level of focusing issues and terrible color fringing. But if you could overlook that, these lenses had that a little extra something that no other lenses had. Some may call it character, some may call it the L lens magic, or it could just be me being biased because they were expensive lenses and most people probably won't even notice the difference. But you know, as a photographer, you cannot deny that these lenses or the images from these lenses were, for the lack of a better word, unique. The Canon RF 50mm 1.2 was one of the first lenses that Canon released when the EOS R first came out, which seems like a really long time ago now. A lot of people, including myself, were very excited about the announcement because we've been waiting for a long time for the updates of the EF 50mm 1.2 and 1.4 lenses. I think the 1.4 lens came out in 1998, if I'm correct. We were all hoping that Canon has captured the magic and character of the old 1.2 lenses in this new packaging with new technologies, and like with many other RF mount lenses that they've released so far, I think they have. I don't think anybody ever said anything bad about this lens since the launch, except maybe the price, which is $2,300, and which sounds like a lot of money, but if you consider the price of the old 1.2 lenses when they first came out, if you consider the inflation in 2020, $2,300 for this lens may not be too much. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's still comparable. The build quality is there like with many other RF mount lenses, and it's quite big and heavy like with many other RF mount lenses. I used to think that the old 1.2 lenses were ginormous, but these make them look like kit lenses. On the body, there's the AF on and off switch, and also the focusing distance switch from full to 0.8 meters to infinity. Based on my experience, the autofocus performance didn't seem to really change between these two modes, except in the full mode you can focus a little closer at about 0.4 meters. The autofocus performance in general has been greatly improved since the launch, thanks to all the firmware updates on the EOS R and the RP, or maybe I should say more specifically, they've improved the eye autofocus and continuous tracking. It's not the fastest autofocusing lens, and when you go from one end to the other, it usually takes about a second or two, which might be a turn off to a lot of people. But if you think about it, this is a lens that's designed to be typically used in a studio or in a portrait session, so it's not like when you're shooting a portrait your model constantly jumps around from the closest focusing distance to the furthest. Once the lens grabbed focus on a subject, it did a great job keeping track of them, and also the eye autofocus worked perfectly. It's not the quietest focusing lens, I don't know if you can hear. So if you're a video shooter, this might be really annoying, but when I was shooting outside, I hardly noticed the noise. Even though this may not be a typical street photography lens because of its size and weight, I had no trouble getting good images with it. Again, it's not the fastest focusing lens, so there were some missed shots, but as long as I took multiple shots, I could always get a few keepers, and it's really hard to make anything not look cool at 1.2. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that at 1.2 on a sunny day, it's very easy to overexpose your images, so your shutter speed is going to be all the way up to 1/8,000th of a second quite often. For those of you who are wondering, the sharpness is definitely there even at 1.2. I mean, why would you spend $2,300 on a 1.2 lens if you're not going to use it at 1.2, right? I know I said I don't care about sharpness, but this is a huge improvement compared to the EF mount lens. So as long as you get the focus right, which is pretty easy to do with the EOS R, you'll have no problems with sharpness. Also, when you're testing a 1.2 lens, you cannot forget about the background blur. With most 50mm lenses, my concern isn't necessarily the amount of background blur, but sometimes at 1.8 or even at 1.4, the background can be quite busy and distracting. But one of the things that the old 1.2 lenses did really well was really smoothing out the shapes in the background so that the main subject can really stand out. And I'm happy to say that the new RF mount lens hasn't lost that ability. Any out of focus areas in the picture, both background and foreground, not only make the main subject pop, but also add additional layers to the photo without being too distracting. Watch the lines on the bench here get blurred out to the point they're not even distinguishable, even though it's only about 3 feet away from the subject. The bouquet balls are nice and round in the middle, and they turn into football shapes around the corners. The old 50 and 85mm lenses sometimes had the strange phenomenon where the balls would get cut off at the top or the bottom, but I never noticed that with the new lens. So to summarize, I think this is becoming a bit of a pattern now. Like with many other RF mount lenses, I love everything about the lens. Everything about the lens is great. It is a little pricey, but if you're a full-time portrait shooter, you might be able to justify the cost of this lens. And ultimately, this is a lens that you want, not necessarily need. And if you're on a limited budget, there are some other options like the Sigma EF 50mm 1.4, which is a lot more affordable than this. But if you want that a little extra something in your images for your own satisfaction, then this is the best 50mm lens that you can get. So that's it for me today. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions about this lens, just leave a comment down below. And if you are interested in purchasing one, also check out the links in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.